The snow fell in relentless sheets, blanketing the ancient forests of Eldoria in a shroud of white that muffled even the fiercest howls of the wind. It was the kind of winter that tested the packs, turning the wild into a graveyard for the weak. Deep in the heart of the whispering woods, where the pines stood like silent sentinels, a lone figure trudged through the drifts. Ilara clutched her tattered cloak tighter around her shoulders, her breath coming in shallow puffs that barely warmed the air. Her bare feet, numb and cracked, sank into the powder with every step. But she pressed on, driven by the whimpers trailing behind her. Her pups, 3 tiny bundles of fur and fragility, stumbled after her, their small paws struggling against the deepening snow. Lyra, the eldest at just 2 moons, nipped at her mother's heels, her golden eyes wide with exhaustion. Beside her, Miko and Little Thorn shivered in unison, their coats matted and thin from days without proper shelter. They were Omegas through and through, born to a life of quiet submission in the fringes of the pack, but now they were outcasts, fleeing the brutality that had claimed their father and turned their home into a nightmare. Ilara's mind raced with fragments of memory, sharp as shards of ice. It had started with the raid, rival wolves from the Shadow Claws pack sweeping through their territory under the cover of a blood moon. Her mate, a gentle beta named Ronan, had fought valiantly, but he was no match for their alpha's fury. She'd hidden the pups in a hollow log, whispering promises of return, but when she emerged, the camp was ash and echoes, the survivors scattered, branded as weaklings, unfit for any pack's protection. Now, hunger gnawed at her belly like a feral beast, and the cold seeped into her bones, threatening to claim them all before dawn. A low growl rumbled through the trees, freezing Ilara in place. Her ears pricked, instinct screaming danger. She scooped up Thorn, the smallest, and urged the others closer, her body a fragile shield against whatever prowled the shadows. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of power, musk and earth. Dominance unchained. It was no ordinary wolf. This was alpha essence, raw and commanding, the kind that bent wills without a word. From the gloom emerged a colossal figure, his form cutting through the blizzard like a blade. King Thorn, ruler of the Eldorian packs, known as the Iron Alpha for his unyielding rule, strode forward on paws that left deep imprints in the snow. His fur was a midnight black streaked with silver, rippling over muscles honed by battles won and territories claimed. Piercing amber eyes locked onto Ilara, assessing her in an instant. The hollow cheeks, the trembling limbs, the pups huddled at her feet. He was no stranger to the harshness of winter, but this sight stirred something primal within him. A flicker of protectiveness he hadn't felt since his own mate's death years ago. Ilara's heart pounded, her Omega instincts warring between submission and flight. Alphas like him didn't wander these woods for sport. They commanded from fortified dens, surrounded by betas and enforcers. Yet here he was, alone, his presence radiating authority that made the very air hum. She lowered her gaze, whispering a plea to the moon goddess for mercy. "Please," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the storm. "We mean no trespass. We're just passing through." Thorn's nostrils flared, inhaling her scent, fear laced with desperation, and beneath it the faint sweetness of untouched loyalty. He circled them slowly, his massive head tilting as he inspected the pups. Lyra bared her tiny teeth in a futile snarl, earning a soft rumble of amusement from the king. Miko whimpered, pressing against Ilara's leg, while Thorn, the pup, nuzzled into her fur, oblivious to the tension. The alpha's gaze softened imperceptibly, but his voice, when it came, was a deep growl that vibrated through the ground. "Passing through to where? Death's door?" Ilara swallowed hard, forcing words past her chattering teeth. "We have nowhere else. Our pack, it's gone. The Shadow Claws took everything." The admission hung heavy, a confession that could seal their fate. Omegas without a pack were prey, liabilities to be culled or claimed. But Thorn didn't lunge. Instead, he paused, his eyes narrowing as if piecing together a puzzle only he could see. The wind howled louder, whipping snow into their faces, and Ilara swayed, her vision blurring from weakness. The pups' whimpers grew frantic, their small bodies quaking. Thorn's instincts surged, a king's duty to protect the vulnerable clashing with the isolation he'd built around his throne. He'd lost his own litter to a plague long ago, a wound that fueled his iron rule. Seeing these little ones so much like his lost ones, cracked the armor he'd worn for seasons. With a decisive huff, he stepped closer, his warmth cutting through the chill like a promise. "Come with me," he growled, the words laced with command, and an undercurrent of something softer, unspoken. It wasn't a request, it was alpha decree, binding as any mate bond. Ilara hesitated, her mind flashing to warnings of kings who devoured the weak, but the alternative was the frozen wilds claiming her family. She nodded, gathering her pups as Thorn turned, leading the way through the storm toward the distant glow of his territory. As they followed, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the snow falling lighter now, as if the moon itself approved. But Ilara couldn't shake the unease coiling in her gut. What did an alpha king want with starving strays? Whispers of his reputation echoed in her thoughts, ruthless in battle, solitary in grief. Yet in his shadow she felt a spark of hope, fragile as a pup's first howl. The path ahead wound through ancient oaks, heavy with frost, their branches creaking like old bones. Thorn moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back to ensure they kept pace, his presence a shield against the night's predators. Deeper into the woods, the terrain shifted, the snow giving way to a frozen stream that Thorn leaped across effortlessly. Ilara struggled, her legs burning, but she urged Lyra and Miko over, carrying Thorn in her jaws. On the other side, the trees thinned, revealing glimpses of torchlight flickering in the distance, the outskirts of the royal grounds. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their eyes snapping to attention at their king's approach. Thorn issued a sharp bark, and they fell back, curiosity rippling through their ranks as they eyed the ragged newcomers. Ilara's pulse raced anew. This was no mere shelter, it was the heart of power, where decisions shaped the fates of entire packs. As they neared the massive stone walls of the Alpha's den, etched with runes of protection, she wondered if she'd traded one danger for another. The pups, sensing the shift, quieted, their exhaustion winning out. Thorn pushed through the entrance, the warmth of roaring fires inside beckoning like a siren's call. Inside, the den was a cavern of contrasts. Furs draped over stone floors, tapestries depicting legendary hunts, and the scent of roasted meat that made Ilara's mouth water. Servants, baiters with bowed heads, scattered at Thorn's entrance, casting furtive glances at the Omega and her brood. He led them to a corner piled with soft pelts, gesturing with his muzzle for her to settle. "Rest here," he rumbled, his voice losing some of its edge. "Food will come." As Ilara curled around her pups, their tiny forms finally stilling in the heat, she met the king's gaze for a fleeting moment. Gratitude warred with suspicion in her eyes. "Why help us?" she whispered, bold in her vulnerability. Thorn's amber eyes held hers, a storm brewing behind them. Because the packs need more than iron, they need heart. He turned away then, vanishing into the deeper halls, leaving Ilara to ponder his words amid the crackle of flames. The night stretched on, but for the first time in days, sleep tugged at her, laced with dreams of safety and shadows of what might come next. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying their tracks as if the forest conspired to rewrite their story. Ilara awoke to the soft crackle of embers and the distant murmur of voices echoing through the stone corridors. The warmth of the den had seeped into her bones overnight, chasing away the chill that had threatened to claim her, but it couldn't melt the knot of uncertainty twisting in her gut. Her pups stirred beside her, Lyra's golden eyes blinking open first, sniffing the air with tentative curiosity. Miko yawned, stretching his tiny limbs, while little Thorn nuzzled deeper into the pile of pelts, his breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The scent of roasted venison lingered, remnants of the meal a beta servant had brought in the dead of night, simple fare, but it had filled their bellies and quieted the hunger's growl. She rose carefully, her muscles aching from the ordeal of the storm, and padded toward the entrance of their alcove. The den's main hall stretched out before her, a vast chamber lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on walls adorned with ancient carvings of snarling wolves and triumphant hunts. Betas moved about with purposeful efficiency. A sturdy female named Kira, her grey fur streaked with white from years of service, stirred a pot over the fire, her sharp eyes flicking toward Ilara with a mix of wariness and pity. Nearby, an older male, Harlan, with a scarred muzzle and a limp from some long-ago skirmish, hauled in fresh wood, grunting under the weight. They didn't approach, but their glances spoke volumes. Strangers in the king's sanctum were rare, and Omegas even rarer. Ilara's ears twitched at the sound of heavy paws approaching, and she tensed, instinctively drawing closer to her pups. Thorn emerged from a side tunnel, his massive frame filling the space like a living shadow. He carried himself with the effortless authority of one who had never known doubt, but there was a subtle weariness in his gait, a shadow behind those amber eyes that hadn't been there in the snow. He nodded to her, a silent acknowledgement, before addressing Kira. See that the little ones get milk from the stores, and herbs for the mother's strength. His voice was a low rumble, not unkind, but laced with the expectation of obedience. Kira bowed her head, murmuring, "As you command, my king," before scurrying off. Harlan paused in his task, shooting Ilara a quick, appraising look, part curiosity, part caution, before resuming his work. Thorn turned back to her, his gaze steady. "You've slept. Good. The storm broke at dawn, but the cold lingers. Eat, then we'll speak." Ilara hesitated, her Omega instincts urging submission, but survival demanded questions. "Speak of what? You've given us shelter, but why? Omegas like us are burdens to a pack like yours." She kept her tone soft, eyes lowered, but there was a spark of defiance in her words, born from too many losses. Thorn's lips curled in what might have been a wry smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He gestured to a low stone bench nearby, piled with furs for comfort. "Sit. The packs of Eldoria aren't what they once were. Raids from the Shadow Claws have bled us dry. Territories lost, families shattered. I found you because the goddess led me there, or so the old tales say. But truth be told, I've been patrolling the borders alone, searching for signs of their next move." He paused, his massive head tilting as he studied her. "You said your pack fell to them. Tell me more. Every detail could turn the tide." Oh, as Ilara settled, pulling her pups close, Lyra now playfully batting at a loose thread in the pelt, she recounted the raid, her voice steady despite the pain resurfacing. The blood moon rising, the howls shattering the night, Ronan's final stand against a hulking enforcer named Grimfang, how she'd hidden the pups in that hollow log, the acrid smoke choking the air as flames devoured their dens. "They didn't just kill," she whispered, her fur bristling. "They marked the survivors as rogues, unfit for any alliance. We fled north, hoping the wilds would hide us, but winter doesn't forgive the weak." Thorn listened without interruption, his expression hardening with each word. The hall seemed to grow quieter, as if the very stones absorbed her story. Kira returned with a bowl of warmed milk for the pups, setting it down gently before retreating, her ears perked as if eavesdropping. Harlan lingered nearby, pretending to sharpen a knife, but his eyes betrayed his interest. When Ilara finished, Thorn rose, pacing the length of the chamber, his claws clicking against the stone. "Grimfang, that name stirs memories. He was exiled from my own ranks years ago for challenging my rule, too ruthless even for war. If the Shadow Claws have him leading their raids, they're bolder than I thought." A sudden commotion from the entrance drew their attention. A young beta scout burst in, snow still clinging to his russet fur, panting as he skidded to a halt before Thorn. "My king! Tracks on the eastern ridge, fresh multiple paws, Shadow Claws, scouting close to our borders." The scout's name was Jax, Ilara overheard later, a wiry lad with eager eyes and a scar across his nose from his first hunt gone wrong. He bowed low, but excitement thrummed in his voice. Thorn's growl filled the hall, low and dangerous, sending the pups huddling closer to Ilara. How many? Any sense of their alpha? 5, maybe 6. No alpha scent, but they're probing, testing our defenses. Jax glanced at Ilara and the pups, his brow furrowing in confusion, but he said nothing. The king's eyes met Ilara's, a flicker of decision passing through them. Stay here. Safe. It was a command, but softer than the night before, almost protective. He turned to Harlan. Rouse the enforcers. We meet this threat head-on. With that he strode out, Jax at his heels, leaving the den buzzing with urgency. Ilara's heart raced, a mix of fear and something warmer, gratitude perhaps, or the stirrings of trust. She watched her pups lap at the milk, Lyra's tail wagging faintly, Miko exploring the alcove with newfound energy, and Thorn, the pup, finally looking plump and content. But as the sounds of preparation echoed, howls summoning the pack, the clash of weapons being readied, doubt crept in. What if the Shadow Claws came for them here? What if Thorn's mercy was just a fleeting whim? Kira approached then, her movements gentle as she offered Ilara a strip of dried meat. The king's heart is iron, but not without cracks, she said softly, her voice like rustling leaves. He lost his own young ones to sickness seasons ago, seeing yours. It reminds him of what he's forgotten, she paused, glancing toward the entrance. But war doesn't wait for healing. If those raiders breach the walls, we'll need every pore. Ilara nodded, chewing slowly, the flavor rich and grounding. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying faint echoes of snarls from the ridge. She curled tighter around her family, whispering assurances even as her mind whirled. Thorn's words from the night before echoed, "The packs need heart." But could a starving Omega provide it? As the den filled with the scent of impending battle, she realized their arrival had woven them into something larger, a thread in the king's unraveling solitude, pulling toward conflict that might save them all or doom them anew. The afternoon wore on, tension coiling like a spring. Messengers came and went, Beta's whispering of Thorn's strategy, an ambush in the thinning woods, using the snow's cover to strike first. Ilara helped where she could, tending to the pups while keeping an ear to the hall's pulse. Harlan shared a gruff tale of Thorn's past glories, his voice gravelly with respect, painting the Alpha as a legend forged in loss. He rules alone, because trust is a blade that cuts both ways, the old Beta said, eyes distant. By dusk, word arrived. The scouts had engaged, a skirmish of fangs and fury. Thorn returned, bloodied but victorious, a fresh scar on his shoulder from Grimfang's lieutenant, though the rogue leader himself had slipped away. His gaze found Ilara's across the hall, holding it with unspoken promise. They're retreating, for now, but this changes things. You're under my protection, no more running. Relief washed over her, mingled with the thrill of belonging, however tentative. As night fell, the den settled into watchful quiet, fires roaring higher against the cold. Ilara lay awake, listening to her pup's soft snores, wondering if this sanctuary was the start of redemption or the eye of a greater storm. The moon hung full outside, casting silver light through cracks in the stone, as if bearing witness to fates intertwining in the heart of Eldoria. The days blurred into a fragile rhythm within the stone walls of Thorn's Den, where the crackle of hearth fires became Ilara's constant companion, a soothing counterpoint to the undercurrent of unrest rippling through the pack. Mornings brought the scent of fresh-killed game, carried in by Harlan and his team of hunters, their paws heavy with the weight of provisions that sustained not just the royal household, but the growing number of refugees trickling in from the borders. Ilara watched from her alcove as the old beta directed the younger ones, Jax among them, his russet fur still flecked with snow from dawn patrols, with gruff efficiency, his scarred muzzle twisting into rare smiles when the pups scampered too close, drawn by the allure of dangling hairs. Lyra had taken to exploring the hall with bold curiosity, her golden eyes sparkling as she darted between legs, eliciting chuckles from Kira, who now treated Ilara like a tentative ally rather than an outsider. The sturdy female beta, with her white-streaked fur and no-nonsense demeanor, shared scraps of pack lore over meals, her voice warm like mulled cider. "The King's Den hasn't seen young ones in years," she'd say, kneading dough for flatbreads, her paws dusted in flour. "Brings life to these old stones. But mind the enforcers, they're loyal to a fault, but suspicious of anything that smells of weakness." Miko, ever the quiet observer, shadowed Harlan during his woodworking sessions, fascinated by the way the elder carved runes into wooden totems, his limp forgotten in moments of focus. Little Thorn, the pup, thrived most, his thin frame filling out under the steady flow of milk and meat, his playful yips echoing off the walls like promises of normalcy. Yet beneath the surface warmth, Ilara felt the pack's watchful eyes. Whispers followed her like shadows, an omega with pups taken in by the Iron Alpha. What hold did she have over him? During evening gatherings around the central fire, where betas shared tales of hunts and skirmishes, she kept to the edges, her ears attuned to the murmurs. A sleek enforcer named Riven, with jet-black fur and a gaze as sharp as flint, eyed her openly, his posture rigid with unspoken challenge. He'd lost a brother to the Shadow Claws years back, Kira confided one afternoon, while grinding herbs, her movements precise and rhythmic. Riven sees threats in every stranger. Don't take it personal, but don't turn your back either. Thorn's presence loomed largest, a gravitational force pulling at the den's orbit. He spent his days in council with his advisors, maps of Eldoria's territories spread across a massive oak table, scarred from countless claw marks. Ilara caught glimpses through arched doorways, the king pacing, his silver-streaked fur catching the torchlight, debating strategies with a circle of stern betas. His voice, that deep rumble, carried fragments, names like Grimfang, border incursions, alliances fraying like old rope. At night, when the pack settled, he'd seek her out, not with demands, but quiet questions, drawing out more of her past like threads from a tapestry. One such evening, as the fire died to glowing embers and the pups dozed in a tangle of limbs, Thorn settled across from her on the fur-draped bench. The hall had emptied, save for Kira's soft humming from the kitchens and Harlan's distant snores. His amber eyes, softened by the low light, fixed on her with an intensity that made her fur prickle. "Your mate, Ronan. He sounds like he fought with honor. Not many betas do." It wasn't pity in his tone, but respect, edged with his own ghosts. Ilara nodded, tracing a paw over Lyra's sleeping form. He was steady, like the river in summer. Taught me that survival isn't just claws and teeth. It's holding on when everything pulls you under. She hesitated, then met his gaze, emboldened by the quiet. "And you? A king doesn't patrol alone without reason. What pulls at you, Thorn?" He shifted, the massive bulk of him casting a long shadow, and for a moment the iron facade cracked. Loss. My mate, Lyrian, and our 3 pups, taken by the fever plague 5 winters past. The healers couldn't save them, and I couldn't forgive the world for it. Since then, I've ruled from afar, keeping the pack strong but distant. No more vulnerabilities. His growl was low, self-directed, as if admitting weakness to the air. "Finding you." It stirred echoes I thought buried. "Your pups remind me of what I swore to protect, not just conquer." The confession hung between them, heavy as the frost outside, forging a bridge Ilara hadn't expected. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper. "Then let us be more than echoes. The Shadow Claws didn't just take my pack. They're unraveling everything. If Grimfang leads them, he won't stop at borders. He'll come for hearts like yours, the ones that still beat." Thorn's eyes darkened, a storm brewing. Before he could respond, a sharp howl pierced the night from the perimeter, a sentry's alarm, urgent and laced with panic. The den erupted into motion, betas scrambling for weapons, Kira bundling the pups protectively while Harlan barked orders to secure the entrances. Riven burst into the hall, his black fur bristling, eyes wild. "Raiders, my king! A dozen strong, slipping through the western pass." "They bear the Shadow Claw's mark, Grimfang's scent on the wind." Thorn rose like a thunderhead, his growl vibrating through the stone. "Ilara, stay with Kira. Guard the young." It was command, but his glance lingered, a silent vow. He rallied his enforcers, Jax falling in at his flank, the young scout's eagerness tempered by fear. As they charged out into the gathering dusk, the air thick with the promise of blood, Ilara's heart hammered. She gathered her pups close, Lyra's small body trembling against hers, Miko's eyes wide with questions she couldn't answer. From the den's vantage, through slits in the walls, she watched the fray unfold, a blur of fangs and fur against the snow-dusted ground. Thorn led the charge, a black whirlwind tearing into the intruders, his roars shaking the pines. Riven flanked him, savage and precise, while Jax darted like a shadow, nipping at flanks. But the raiders were cunning, feinting and retreating, their howls mocking as they tested the pack's resolve. One broke through, a wiry beta with scarred ears, lunging toward the den's side entrance. Harlan met him there, his limp no hindrance, as he clamped jaws around the intruder's throat. ending the threat in a spray of crimson. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though the moon barely shifted. Thorn emerged victorious again, dragging a captured raider by the scruff, the enemy's eyes defiant even in defeat. Blood matted his fur, a new gash across his chest, but his stance was unbroken. As the pack regrouped, tending wounds by torchlight, he sought Ilara's gaze across the yard, nodding once, a signal of survival, of bonds tested but holding. Inside, as Kira applied salves to the pup's minor scrapes from the chaos, Ilara felt the shift within her. No longer just a stray, she was woven into this fight, her presence igniting something in the king that the iron couldn't contain. But as the captive's snarls echoed from the holding cells, promising tales of Grimfang's greater plans, doubt flickered. Protection came at a cost, and in Eldoria's unforgiving wilds, trust was the sharpest blade of all. The night deepened, fires stoked high, but sleep evaded her, haunted by visions of shadows closing in. The morning after the raid dawned crisp and unforgiving, the sun piercing the frost-laced canopy like a reluctant witness to the night's violence. Thorn's den hummed with a subdued energy, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood scrubbed from stone floors and the herbal bite of salves applied to fresh wounds. Ilara moved through the hall with cautious grace, her paws silent on the warmed pelts, carrying a woven basket of linens Kira had pressed into her care. The sturdy beta, her white-streaked fur tied back with a strip of leather, worked beside her at the central hearth, her movements efficient yet gentle as she tended to the injured enforcers lounging nearby. Riven lay propped against a wall, his jet-black fur matted with bandages across his flank, his sharp gaze following Ilara like a hawk tracking prey. The sleek enforcer grunted as Kira prodded his wound, his voice a rough bark. "Easy, old one. I've had worse from training pups." But his eyes softened fractionally when Lyra scampered over, the young pup's golden gaze wide with innocent concern. She dropped a small, carved wooden wolf, a gift from Harlan's morning whittling, at his feet, her tiny tail wagging hesitantly. Riven's lips twitched in surprise, and he nudged it back with his nose. "Keep it, little shadow. You'll need claws sharper than mine someday." Ilara's heart swelled at the sight, a fragile bridge forming amid the suspicion. Miko hovered nearby, his quiet nature drawing him to the shadows where Jax rested, the young scout nursing a twisted paw from the fray. The russet-furred beta regaled the pup with exaggerated tales of the battle, his scarred nose wrinkling in mock ferocity. And then the king leapt, bam, right over that raider's back, jaws like thunder. Miko's ears perked, his small form leaning in, absorbing the heroics with wide-eyed awe. Little Thorn, ever the explorer, batted at embers in the fire pit under Harlan's watchful eye, the old beta's limp more pronounced as he shuffled to intervene, chuckling deeply. "Careful, wee one. Fire's got teeth just like us." But the levity couldn't mask the undercurrent of dread coiling through the den. The captured raider, a gaunt beta named Silas with mangy brown fur and eyes like chipped obsidian, was held in the lower cells, a damp warren of stone tunnels beneath the main hall, guarded by two unyielding enforcers. Thorn had descended at first light, his massive frame vanishing into the gloom, and the echoes of his interrogation had filtered up like distant thunder. Growls, sharp questions, the occasional snarl of defiance. Ilara felt it in her bones, the weight of secrets unraveling, and when Thorn emerged hours later, his amber eyes stormy and his silver-streaked fur dusted with the chill of underground drafts, she knew the shadows were closing in. He found her in the alcove, away from the bustle, where she'd gathered the pups for a midday meal of stewed roots and tender rabbit. The king paused at the threshold, his presence filling the space, a mix of exhaustion and resolve etched into his powerful lines. Silas talked, he rumbled, settling onto the furs with a heavy sigh that stirred the air. The pups looked up briefly, Lyra with curiosity, Miko with shyness, Thorn with a yawn, before returning to their bowls, the normalcy of the moment a balm against the tension. Ilara set her own meal aside, her hollow cheeks still bearing the marks of hardship, though the den's care had begun to soften them. What did he say? Grimfang's plans? Do they reach this far? Her voice was steady, laced with the quiet strength Ronan had instilled in her, but her tail flicked nervously, betraying the Omega's instinctive fear of the unknown. Thorn's gaze held hers, the warmth of the hearth reflecting in his eyes like fleeting stars. More than plans. Ambition. Grimfang's rallying outcasts from every fallen pack, promising them thrones built on our bones. He knows of you. Your escape from the raid marked you as a symbol, a loose thread he once tied off. But it's me he's after truly, to shatter the Iron Alpha and claim Eldoria as his empire. He paused, his massive paw flexing, as if remembering the feel of Silas's throat under his grip. The fever that took my family. Grimfang's pack spread it years ago as a weapon. I exiled him for it, but vengeance festers. The revelation hit Ilara like a winter gust, weaving their losses into a single, tangled fate. She leaned closer, her fur brushing his, in an accidental spark of contact that sent a shiver through her. Then we're not burdens. We're bait he won't expect. Use us, let me help. I've seen his tactics up close, the way they strike at dawn, feigning weakness to draw out the strong. Her words carried a fire she'd long suppressed, the Omega's submission yielding to a mother's ferocity. Thorn studied her, the iron in his rule softening like snow under sun. You'd stand with me, an Omega and her young, in the heart of war? There was no mockery, only a raw vulnerability, echoes of his buried grief surfacing in the tilt of his head. Before she could answer, a commotion erupted from the hall, Kira's sharp yelp cutting through the air. Ilara bolted upright, Pups scrambling after her as they rushed out. The sturdy beta stood over a spilled pot, her paws stained with broth, but it was the messenger at her feet that drew gasps. A young female scout, Lena, her tawny fur torn and bloodied, collapsing from the effort of her run. King, borders breached. Grimfang's main force, 50 strong with war beasts from the southern wilds, they're marching on the den 2 days out. The hall fell into orchestrated chaos. Harlan bellowed for arms, his gruff voice rallying the able-bodied, while Riven pushed to his feet despite the pain, his enforcer instincts overriding injury. Jax limped forward, eyes alight with determination, and even Silas's distant snarls from below seemed to mock the urgency. Thorn rose, his growl a clarion call that silenced all. To the walls! We fortify now, traps in the passes, scouts on the ridges. No pack falls while I draw breath. Ilara met his gaze amid the swirl, her pups pressed to her side, Lyra's small snarl mirroring her own resolve. "We're with you," she whispered, the words binding them deeper than any alpha command. As Thorn nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes, the den transformed from sanctuary to bastion. Outside, the wind howled warnings, carrying the faint, ominous rhythm of distant drums. Trust, forged in shared scars, became their sharpest weapon, but with Grimfang's shadow looming, Ilara wondered if it would be enough to hold the storm at bay, or if the heart he'd awakened in the king would be the first to break. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over Eldoria's frost-kissed lands as preparations unfolded in a dance of defiance and dread. The frost clung to the stone walls of Thorn's den like a living shroud, turning every breath into a visible plea against the encroaching winter. 2 days, that's all the scouts had bought them with their frantic warnings, and now the pack moved as one organism, paws pounding earth and claws scraping rock in a symphony of preparation. Ilara wove through the controlled frenzy of the main hall, her basket of bandages long discarded in favor of more urgent tasks. Hera had thrust a bundle of sharpened stakes into her paws earlier, the sturdy beta's white-streaked fur dusted with dirt from the armory. "You're lighter on your feet than most," Kira had said, her voice a mix of encouragement and steel. "Help plant these in the passes. Make the bastards trip over their own greed." Ilara nodded, the weight of purpose settling over her like a second skin, chasing away the last echoes of her stray days. Outside, the air bit sharp and metallic, carrying the distant thrum of war drums that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. The western ridge, once a serene overlook of snow-capped pines, now bristled with activity. Harlan directed a team of diggers, his scarred muzzle set in grim lines as he drove stakes into the frozen ground with a mallet fashioned from antler bone. His limp slowed him not at all. If anything, it fueled his bark-like commands. "Deeper, you louts! Grimfang's curs won't sniff out subtlety. They'll charge blind." Nearby, Jax limped along the perimeter, his russet fur fluffed against the cold, marking traps with subtle scents of false trails. The young scout's scarred nose twitched constantly, his eager eyes scanning the horizon where Lena's report had painted an army on the march. 50 wolves strong, bolstered by hulking war beasts from the southern wilds, creatures of legend with hides like iron and tempers forged in volcanic fury. Ilara worked alongside Riven, an unlikely pairing that spoke volumes of the pack's desperation. The sleek enforcer, his jet-black fur still bandaged, but his movements fluid with barely contained energy, drove stakes with savage precision. He'd eyed her warily at first, his flint-sharp gaze lingering on the pups she'd left in Kira's care inside the den. Lyra had protested the separation with a tiny snarl, her golden eyes fierce, but Miko's quiet nudge and Little Thorn's yawn had eased her into play with a pile of bones. "You're no warrior," Riven grunted now, slamming another stake home without looking up, "but you've got fire in those eyes, like my brother's did before the claws took him." It was the closest he'd come to acceptance, a grudging bridge over his suspicion, and Ilara seized it, sharing fragments of the raid that had orphaned her. How Grimfang's forces used diversions, feigned retreats to lure defenders into ambushes. As the sun dipped toward noon, casting elongated shadows over the ridge, Thorn appeared like a storm front rolling in. His midnight black fur, streaked with silver, was matted from hours in the lower cells, where Silas's interrogation had yielded more venom than truth. The captive's mangy form still echoed in the tunnels, his obsidian eyes promising chaos even from chains. Thorn's amber gaze swept the line of workers, lingering on Ilara with a heat that cut through the chill. He approached, his massive paws leaving deep prints in the thinning snow, and nodded to Riven, who dipped his head in deference before moving off to oversee the next section. "The traps are solid," Thorn rumbled, his voice a low vibration that resonated in her chest. "But it's the beasts that worry me. Southern warhounds, tamed by blood magic, or so the old scrolls say. Silas swears Grimfangs tamed a pack of them, driven mad with hunger." Ilara straightened, wiping frost from her paws, her tattered cloak replaced by a simple woolen wrap Kira had gifted her. Practical, warm, a quiet claim to belonging. "I've heard tales from traders on the fringes," she replied, meeting his eyes without flinching, the omega in her yielding to the survivor. "They fear fire most. Ronan once drove off a rogue one with torches during a border skirmish. If we line the passes with pits of oil and flint." Her words trailed as inspiration sparked, and Thorn's lips curved in a rare, approving rumble, his tail flicking once, a king's praise, subtle but profound. He stepped closer, the musk of his alpha essence wrapping around her like a shield, stirring instincts she'd buried under grief. "Smart, we'll do it. But you, stay back from the front lines. The pups need their mother." There was protectiveness in his tone, edged with the raw edge of his confessions from nights past, when the den's quiet had drawn out his losses like poison from a wound. Ilara's fur prickled at the nearness, a warmth blooming despite the cold, but she pushed back gently, And who needs you if not all of us? This isn't just your war, Thorn. Grimfang took my world. Let me help rebuild it. Her voice held steady, laced with the promise of partnership, and for a moment his amber eyes softened, the iron alpha glimpsing the heart he'd long armored against. The moment shattered with Lena's urgent bark from the tree line. The tawny scout, her torn fur hastily patched, bounded forward, panting clouds of breath. Movement, my king! Scouts on the southern trail, 3 of them, probing the flanks. No beasts yet, but they're close. Thorn's growl rippled through the group, drawing every ear to attention. Harlan paused mid-swing, Jax froze in his marking, and even Riven's ears flattened in alert readiness. The king issued swift orders: flank the intruders, take no prisoners for questioning, before turning back to Elara. Go to the den, arm the inner guards. It was command, but his glance held a flicker of reluctance, as if leaving her felt like severing a limb. She obeyed, heart pounding as she raced down the ridge, the wind whipping her ears with whispers of impending doom. Inside, the hall thrummed with its own preparations. Kira sharpening blades by the hearth, her sturdy frame tense as she hummed a low, steadying tune. Harlan's absence noted by the younger betas, hauling arrows from storage. The pups sensed the shift, clustering around Ilara's legs as she entered, Lyra's small body pressing close, Miko's quiet gaze seeking reassurance, little Thorn nuzzling her flank with innocent trust. "Mama, is the bad wind coming?" Lyra asked, her voice a piping whine that twisted Ilara's gut. "Not if we stand together," Ilara murmured, drawing them into the alcove and barricading the entrance with a heavy fur curtain. But as shouts erupted from the ridge, snarls and the clash of bodies, she couldn't shake the vision of Thorn in the fray, his black form a beacon for Grimfang's wrath. Hours stretched, marked by the sun's slow arc, until Jax burst through the doors at dusk, bloodied but triumphant, dragging a bound scout whose whimpers spoke of defeat. "2 down, 1 escaped," he panted to Kira, collapsing near the fire. "The king's holding the line, but they're pushing harder." Beasts sighted, massive shadows in the mist. Ilara's blood ran cold, her paws itching to join the fight, but the pup's warmth anchored her. Thorn returned later, under cover of twilight, his chest heaving, a shallow gash across his muzzle, weeping red. He sought her out immediately, collapsing beside the alcove with a weary huff. "We bloodied them, but Grimfang's close. Dawn will bring the full assault." His eyes met hers, the storm within them calmed by her presence, and in that shared silence, amid the den's flickering shadows, Ilara felt the bond deepen, fragile threads weaving into steel. Yet, as distant howls rose on the wind, carrying the guttural roars of approaching war beasts, doubt gnawed. Could their newfound heart withstand the claws that sought to tear it asunder? The night deepened, fires stoked against the encroaching dark, but Eldoria's fate hung by a thread, taut and trembling. The night before the assault wrapped the den in a veil of restless shadows, the hearth fires burning low and fierce, their flames licking at logs that popped like distant gunfire. Ilara lay curled in the alcove, her body a warm fortress around her pups, but sleep eluded her like a skittish deer. Lyra's soft snores mingled with Miko's even breaths, while little Thorn twitched in his dreams, chasing phantom rabbits through meadows that existed only in his innocent mind. The air hummed with the pack's subdued murmurs, betas sharpening claws on whetstones, the scrape echoing like teeth on bone. Outside, the wind carried the low, rumbling growls of the war beasts, faint but insistent, a promise of carnage that clawed at Ilara's resolve. She rose quietly, slipping from the pelts, her paws padding across the cool stone toward the main hall. Thorn was there, silhouetted against the dying embers, his massive form hunched over a rough-hewn map spread on the oak table. Silver streaks in his black fur caught the firelight, making him look both ancient and unbreakable, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the weight he carried. Riven paced nearby, his bandaged flank pulling tight with each step, his jet-black coat bristling as he muttered strategies under his breath. We hit them in the narrow pass. Funnel the beasts into the pits, he growled, more to himself than anyone, his flint-sharp eyes flicking to the entrance as if expecting the enemy to burst through at any moment. Kira moved like a shadow among the enforcers, distributing poultices and waterskins, her white-streaked fur tied back tightly, her sturdy frame a pillar of calm amid the storm. She caught Ilara's eye and nodded toward Thorn, her voice a soft rumble as she passed. He's been at it since the scouts returned, won't rest till the moon sets. Harlan sat in a corner, his scarred muzzle buried in whittling a new totem, a snarling wolf meant to ward off evil, his limp legs stretched out, but his paws steady, carving away the wood with deliberate strokes. Jax hovered at the table's edge, the young scout's russet fur fluffed from nerves, his scarred nose twitching at every creak of the walls. Ilara approached Thorn, her heart thudding a rhythm that matched the distant drums. "You need to eat," she said simply, setting a strip of dried venison beside the map. It was a small act, but in the charged air it felt like defiance against the encroaching doom. He looked up, amber eyes weary yet igniting at her presence, and for a moment the king was just a wolf, burdened and alone. "Can't. Grimfang's scent is on the wind, stronger now." Zaylas lied about their numbers. It's more like 70, with those cursed beasts leading the charge. His voice was a gravelly whisper, laced with the raw edge of a leader staring down oblivion. She settled beside him, her shoulder brushing his, the contact sending a spark through her veins, Omega instincts flaring not in submission, but in solidarity. "Then tell me how to help. The pups are safe with Kira. Let me stand watch on the inner walls." Her words hung bold, echoing the fire she'd shown on the ridge, and Thorn's gaze searched hers, weighing the risk against the pull he felt, that inexplicable tether drawing him to her since the snowstorm. Before he could respond, a low howl sliced through the night from the perimeter. Lena's voice, urgent and laced with alarm. The hall snapped to attention. Riven's ears flattened, Harlan set down his carving with a clatter, and Jax bolted to the door, his limp forgotten in adrenaline. Thorn was on his paws in an instant, a growl building in his chest as he strode out, Elara at his flank, despite his sharp glance of warning. The cold night air hit like a slap, stars wheeling overhead in indifferent brilliance, the snow-crusted yard alive with shadows. Lena waited by the gate, her tawny fur ragged from another run, panting as she reported. Advance party, 10 raiders, slipping through the mist. No beasts, but they're planting diversions, fires in the underbrush to draw us out. Thorn's roar shattered the quiet, summoning the enforcers in a wave of fur and fury. Riven, take the left flank, cut them off. Jax, Lena, scout the fires but don't engage. The orders flew like arrows, the pack mobilizing with honed precision. Elara felt the pull of the fight, her claws flexing instinctively, but Thorn's massive paw barred her path. Not you! Back inside! It was Alpha Command, ironclad, but his eyes pleaded. Protect the heart of us, they seemed to say. She relented, retreating to the threshold, watching as the group melted into the darkness. The skirmish unfolded in bursts, snarls echoing from the trees, the thud of bodies hitting snow, a yelp cut short by Riven's savage bite. Harlan joined the fray from the rear, his mallet swinging like a club, felling a raider who got too close to the walls. Minutes stretched into eternity, Elara's pulse thundering, until Thorn returned, dragging a limp form, the lead scout, bound and snarling curses about Grimfang's unbreakable will. Blood streaked the king's muzzle, but his stride was steady, victory small but vital. Back in the hall, as Kira tended the wounded, Jax with a fresh gash on his shoulder, Lena limping from a twisted ankle, Thorn pulled Elara aside into the shadowed alcove where the pups stirred sleepily at their return. Lyra's golden eyes blinked open, her small body wriggling forward to nuzzle Thorn's leg, an act of pure trust that cracked something deep in the Alpha's guarded heart. "You were right," he murmured to Elara, his breath warm against her ear. "The fire pits. We used torches to rout them. Your idea saved lives tonight." Gratitude laced his tone, mingling with a deeper hunger, the bond between them thickening like honey in the fire's glow. She leaned into him, the pups settling between their forms, a makeshift family forged in frost and fire. "We're stronger together," she whispered, her paw tracing the gash on his muzzle, a tender touch that made him rumble softly, his amber eyes closing briefly in surrender. But the moment fractured, as Silas's voice drifted up from the cells below, a mocking howl, taunting the guards with whispers of Grimfang's dawn strategy. Beasts first, to shatter the gates, then the horde to claim the spoils, including the starving Omega and her whelps. Thorn's fur bristled, his growl vibrating through the stone, but Elara placed a steadying paw on his chest. "He wants fear. Don't give it to him." Her words anchored him, the Omega's quiet strength a counter to his storm, and in that shared breath, trust solidified. Fragile no more, but a blade honed for the battles ahead. As the pack bedded down for what little rest remained, fires stoked high against the chill. The distant drums grew louder, a heartbeat counting down to dawn. Ilara held her family close, Thorn's warmth a promise beside her, but in the depths of the night, doubt whispered, would their woven hearts endure the claws of war, or shatter under Grimfang's vengeful shadow? The stars watched, silent judges, as Eldoria braced for the storm's full fury. Dawn broke over Eldoria like a wound splitting the sky, the first rays of sun bleeding crimson across the frost-laced ridges. The air thrummed with the guttural roars of the war beasts, their massive forms lumbering through the mist-shrouded passes, hides scarred and eyes glowing with unnatural fury. Thorn stood at the forefront of his pack on the western wall, his midnight black fur rippling in the chill wind, amber eyes locked on the horizon where Grimfang's horde emerged. A seething mass of 70 wolves, flanks bolstered by the southern monstrosities that shook the ground with each thunderous step. The drums had fallen silent, replaced by the cacophony of snarls and snapping jaws. The shadow claws advance, a tide of vengeance crashing toward the den. Ilara lingered at the inner threshold, her paws rooted despite Thorn's earlier command to stay hidden. The pups were secured deep in the alcove with Kira, the sturdy beta's white-streaked fur a comforting barrier as she whispered tales of past victories to Lyra's wide golden eyes, Miko's quiet form, and little Thorn's playful nips. "Mama's strong like the moon," Kira murmured, her voice steady as she barricaded the door with stone slabs. But Ilara couldn't retreat fully. The bond pulling her toward Thorn was a live wire, humming with the Alpha's essence that now coursed through her veins like shared blood. She clutched a torch in her jaws, its flame flickering against the dawn, ready for the fire pits she'd helped conceive. From the ridge, Harlan's bellow cut through the tension. The old beta's scarred muzzle twisted in defiance as he lit the first line of oil-soaked trenches. "Hold the line, you curs, for the king and the heart." Flames erupted in a roaring wall, the heat warping the air and sending acrid smoke billowing skyward. The Lid war beast, a colossal brute with tusks like curved blades and fur matted in ritual scars, barreled forward undeterred, its roar shattering the morning quiet. Riven met it head-on, the sleek enforcer leaping from a hidden vantage, his jet-black form a blur as he sank claws into its flank. The beast bucked, hurling him aside with a swipe that tore fresh gashes across his already bandaged side, but Riven rolled, snarling, and ignited a secondary pit that engulfed the creature's legs in searing orange. Jax darted through the chaos like a russet phantom, his limp a forgotten shadow as he nipped at raider heels, drawing them into the stake-filled gullies Ilara had helped plant. One shadow claw wolf, a lanky beta with notched ears, lunged at him, But the young scout fainted, leading the foe straight into a concealed spike that ended in a gurgling yelp. Lena flanked from the tree line, her tawny fur blending with the underbrush, her arrows, tipped with sharpened bone, whistling through the air to pin down archers in Grimfang's ranks. The pack fought with feral precision, Thorn's roars orchestrating the defense, his massive paws crushing any who breached the flames. He tore through a cluster of raiders, silver streaks flashing as he claimed throats, blood staining the snow in dark blooms, but his eyes scanned constantly for the rogue Alpha, the true venom at the horde's heart. Ilara's breath caught as a war beast broke the line, its bulk splintering a section of the outer wall with a crash that sent stones tumbling. Raiders poured through the breach, their howls triumphant, eyes gleaming with the promise of slaughter. She surged forward, torch raised, her omega frame small but ignited by maternal fire. "Not today," she growled, igniting an inner fire pit that bloomed before the den's gates, the blaze forcing the intruders to veer into Harlan's waiting jaws. The old beta swung his mallet with a grunt, cracking a raider's skull, his limp leg planted firm as if rooted to Eldoria's soul. "That's for the young ones," he bellowed, even as another beast loomed, its shadow swallowing the light. Thorn whirled at the sound of splintering wood, his amber gaze locking on Ilara amid the fray. A surge of protectiveness roared through him, fiercer than any battle rage, propelling him across the yard in bounds that blurred his form. He intercepted the beast mid-charge, leaping onto its back and clamping jaws around its thick neck, muscles straining as it thrashed. The creature's hide was tough, laced with some dark enchantment that resisted his fangs, but Thorn's growl deepened, alpha power surging like a storm. Ilara flanked him, her torch jabbing at the beast's eyes, the flames singeing fur and eliciting a pained bellow that loosened its stance. Together they drove it back into the outer pits, where Riven and Jax swarmed, claws and fire finishing the deed in a symphony of agony. Panting, Thorn turned to her, his chest heaving, blood matting his silver-streaked fur from a gash along his ribs. "I told you to stay back," he rumbled, but there was no anger, only a raw awe that softened his edges, his massive head nuzzling her shoulder in a fleeting claim that sent warmth flooding through her. Ilara met his gaze, her own fur singed and paws blistered, but her eyes burned with unyielding light. "And leave you to face this alone? We're in this, Thorn, all of us." The words sealed something profound, their sense mingling in the smoke, the bond between Alpha and Omega forging tighter amid the chaos, a heartbeat sinking with the pack's defiant howls. But victory's taste soured as a new roar split the air, not beast, but wolf, deeper and laced with malice. Grimfang emerged from the horde's rear, his hulking frame a twisted mirror of thorns, grey fur scarred from exile, eyes burning with fevered hate, flanked by elite enforcers who carved a bloody path forward. The rogue Alpha's gaze fixed on Thorn, then slid to Ilara, a sneer curling his muzzle. The Iron King, softened by a stray's whelps, I'll gut you both and mount your heads on my throne. His voice boomed, carrying over the din, igniting fresh fury in the Shadow Claws as they redoubled their assault, beasts and wolves converging on the weakened breach. Thorn's growl answered, a thunderclap that rallied the pack, Riven charging with renewed savagery, Harlan and Kira bolstering the inner defenses, Jax and Lena picking off stragglers from afar. Ilara felt the pup's distant whimpers through the bond, a pull that anchored her even as she stood shoulder to shoulder with Thorn, ready for the clash that would decide Eldoria's fate. The sun climbed higher, casting the battlefield in stark relief, shadows lengthening as Grimfang closed in, his claws promising an end to their fragile world. In that moment, with fire raging and blood soaking the snow, Ilara realized their woven hearts weren't just survival. They were the spark that could consume the darkness or light a new dawn. But as Grimfang lunged, fangs bared for the kill, the storm of war reached its zenith, teetering on the edge of shattering everything. The clash of fangs and thunderous roars drowned the world as Grimfang lunged, his scarred grey form a projectile of pure malice, hurtling toward Thorn. The rogue Alpha's eyes blazed with the madness of years spent nursing grudges, his jaws parted in a snarl that promised not just death, but erasure, the kind that wiped legacies from the snow. Thorn met him mid-air, their massive bodies colliding with a bone-jarring impact that sent snow exploding outward like shattered ice. Claws raked fur, drawing hot lines of blood across Thorn's shoulder, but the Iron King twisted, his amber eyes locked on his foe's throat, alpha power surging through him like molten resolve. Ilara dodged a swiping paw from one of Grimfang's elite enforcers, a burly wolf with a notched ear and foaming maw, her torch sputtering but unyielding. She jabbed the flame into his face, eliciting a yelp that bought her space to circle back toward Thorn. The battlefield was a maelstrom. Riven tore into a war beast's underbelly, his jet-black fur slick with gore, a triumphant howl escaping as the monster crumpled into a flaming pit. Harlan swung his mallet in wide arcs, felling two raiders who lunged for the breach, his scarred muzzle split in a fierce grin despite the blood trickling from a gash on his brow. "For the den!" he bellowed, his limp leg planted like an ancient oak refusing to fall. Jax and Lena worked in tandem from the flanks, the young scout's russet form darting low while the tawny female loosed arrows that pinned enemies to the frozen earth. One shaft found its mark in a shadow claw archer aiming for Thorn's back, the wolf crumpling with a gurgle. Kira held the inner line, her sturdy frame a bulwark as she herded stragglers towards safety, her white-streaked fur matted with sweat and soot. Inside the alcove, the pups huddled, Lyra's golden eyes fierce through the barricade cracks, Miko whispering encouragements to little Thorn, whose tiny paws clutched a carved totem like a talisman. Grimfang broke free from Thorn's grip with a savage twist, his claws gouging the king's chest, reopening the earlier wound. Blood sprayed, warm and metallic, but Thorn didn't falter. He countered with a headbutt that cracked against the rogue's skull, stunning him long enough for Ilara to leap in. Her torch ignited a hidden oil slick at their paws, flames erupting in a barrier that forced Grimfang back, his fur singeing as he snarled curses. "You think a beggar's fire stops me? I'll burn your whole pack." But the blaze brought Thorn the moment he needed, lunging again to clamp jaws around the rogue's foreleg, crunching bone with a sickening snap. The horde wavered, their momentum fracturing as the war beasts fell one by one. Riven's savagery claiming another, its roars fading into whimpers drowned by the crackle of fire. Jax nipped at heels, herding the beasts into traps where stakes impaled their iron hides, while Lena's arrows felled their handlers. The Shadowclaw's howls turned to panicked yips, the promise of easy victory crumbling under the pack's unyielding defense. Grimfang thrashed, his grey form weakening as Thorn's weight pinned him. But vengeance fueled one last surge. He raked claws across the king's underbelly, drawing a pained grunt, then twisted free, eyes wild on Ilara. "You, the Omega whore who escaped my raid. Your pups will be the first to bleed." Rage ignited in Ilara like a spark to dry tinder. She dropped the torch, charging with a mother's fury, her smaller frame weaving under his swing to sink teeth into his haunch. Grimfang howled, staggering, and Thorn seized the opening, rearing up to slam both forepaws down on the rogue's back. The impact echoed like a felled tree, Grimfang's body crumpling, his laboured breaths rasping defiance, even as blood pooled beneath him. "Eldoriaker will fall," he wheezed, but Thorn's final bite silenced him, jaws closing around the throat in a swift, merciful end. The rogue Alpha's eyes dimmed, the shadow of his ambition dissolving into the snow. A collective roar rose from the pack, victory's howl shaking the pines as the remaining Shadowclaws fled, tails low into the mist-shrouded wilds. The war beasts' guttural cries faded to silence, their hulking forms smouldering ruins in the pits. Thorn released Grimfang's lifeless form, his chest heaving, blood dripping from multiple gashes that painted his black fur in crimson streaks. He turned to Ilara, amber eyes meeting her wide gaze, the storm within them calming to a profound warmth. She limped forward, nuzzling his neck, her own body aching but alive, the Omega's submission blooming into something fiercer, equality forged in battle. "You fought like a queen," he rumbled, his massive head resting against hers, sense mingling in a bond that hummed with unspoken promise. The pack gathered, Riven limping forward with a nod of respect, his flint eyes softened, Harlan leaning on his mallet, chuckling through his pain, Jax and Lena bounding over, tails high, Kira emerging with the pups in tow, Lyra leading the charge to tumble into Ilara's legs with joyful yips. Miko and Little Thorn piled on, their small forms warm against the cooling air, the family's wholeness a balm to the scars of war. As the sun crested fully, gilding the bloodied snow in gold, Thorn raised his muzzle to the sky, his howl a call of triumph and renewal. The pack joined, voices weaving into a chorus that echoed across Eldoria, mending the fractures Grimfang had wrought. Ilara stood beside him, pups at their paws, feeling the Alpha's essence wrap around her like an eternal cloak. In the quiet that followed, as betas tended wounds and salvaged the fallen, Thorn whispered against her ear, "Stay." Not as strays, but as mine, as ours. The packs need heart, and you've given it back to me. She met his gaze, a soft rumble in her throat, the Omega's loyalty deepening into love. We stay. For the future we've clawed from the storm. The den, once a fortress of iron solitude, now pulsed with life. Laughter from the pups chasing Jax's tail, Kira's steady voice directing the cleanup, Riven sharing a rare jest with Harlan. The snow began to melt under the rising sun, rivulets tracing paths of renewal. As Thorn and Ilara turned toward the hall together, their steps synced, the bond sealed in blood and fire. Eldoria endured, stronger for the heart that had thawed the king's frost, promising seasons of peace amid the wild's eternal whisper.